After my twin sister ran away from her wedding, my biological parents used my foster mother's medical expenses as leverage, forcing me to marry in her place. I agreed. After the wedding, my husband treated me like I was after his money. He toyed with me, shared private photos with his friends, and even burned the legal protections I had secured for my adoptive mother. Whenever someone mentioned our marriage, his eyes filled with mockery. He thought I was eager to marry him. But what he didn't know was that I was counting down the days until my sister's return, the day I would give back the title of Mrs. Hay and walk away. The night before Vanessa's wedding, she landed at 3 a.m. At 2 a.m., Brian was sound asleep. I quietly got up, changed clothes, and left the villa. At the airport, I stood 2 meters away from my biological parents. Mrs. Jang, who once called me daughter, only gave me a complicated look. When Vanessa arrived, looking exactly like me, emotions surged inside me. She had always been the chosen one, selfishly running away, knowing someone else would clean up her mess. As I stood lost in thought, Vanessa approached, a faint contempt in her eyes. "Thank you, sister, for giving me 3 months of freedom," she said coldly. "But now that I'm back, the title should return to its rightful owner." Mr. and Mrs. Jang handed me a card and a confidentiality agreement. In exchange for money, I was to sign, disappear, and never appear before Brian again. Mrs. Jang hesitated. "Emma, do you want to come home?" Before I could answer, Mr. Jang interrupted, saying the money would be enough for a lifetime. I left without looking back, hearing their laughter behind me. I deposited the payment into my bank account. The card contained not only the Jang family's money, but also funds Brian had unknowingly given me. Despite his hatred, he had still provided generously during our marriage, luxury goods, monthly allowances, gifts. I sold most of it and saved every penny. With the money, I got the best treatment for my mother. Her condition improved quickly. My career also took off. I won second place in a design competition, and companies began offering collaborations. Because of the confidentiality agreement, my mother and I couldn't return to the Jang family's city. Instead, we settled in North Beijing. I rented a small 2-bedroom apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows. Life finally felt peaceful. Occasionally, social media would push Vanessa's updates to me. In one post, she shared photos of unappetizing dishes she cooked herself. In another, she complained about Brian coming home late, cold and distant, treating her with indifference. One night, Vanessa posted a video. Their home had been trashed. She admitted in the comments, "He has another woman." I slapped her. And he hit me. I smirked. That woman must be Cynthia, Brian's precious one. 6 months later, my mother finished chemotherapy and recovered well. My career blossomed. One evening, while accompanying my manager to meet a major client, I unexpectedly saw Brian again. He sat at the center of the room, still surrounded by admirers. I tried to leave, but it was too late. "Vanessa," he said coldly, mistaking me for my sister. "What are you doing here?" Frozen for a moment, I realized he didn't know the truth. I had no choice but to play along. "I was worried about you," I said softly. "I'm your wife. Is it wrong to check?" Brian's face darkened. In front of everyone, he raised his hand to hit me, but I stepped back quickly. "Fine," I shouted. "I want a divorce." And without waiting for a reaction, I ran out. Later, I texted Vanessa, briefly explaining what had happened. She bombarded me with voice messages I didn't bother to open. The next morning, she simply texted, "Okay. Problem solved, at least for now." That evening, after work, I stopped by a fruit store. There was only one box of blueberries left. As I reached for it, another hand appeared at the same time, Brian's. He stared at me intently, scanning my face as if trying to uncover a secret. "What should I call you?" he asked quietly. "Vanessa? Or Emma?" My hand froze in midair, fingertips barely brushing the box of blueberries. Brian's voice, low and hoarse, cut through the thick silence between us. "Answer me," he demanded. "Are you?" I could feel his eyes drilling into me, desperate, furious, but also, frighteningly, pleading. I had two choices: lie and sink deeper into the mess Vanessa had created, or tell the truth and blow everything apart. I dropped my hand slowly, breathing in the chill of the late evening air. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said. voice steady. I'm just here to buy fruit. Brian's jaw clenched. His entire body tensed like a coiled spring. You really expect me to believe that? He spat. He pulled out his phone, thumb flying across the screen. Seconds later, he shoved the screen in my face, a photo of Vanessa from months ago, a blurred image taken at some high-end event. Her smile was wide, bright, reckless. Mine had never looked like that. You're not her, Brian said, voice breaking slightly. You're not the woman who married me 3 months ago. I opened my mouth, and then closed it. There was no use pretending anymore. You're right, I whispered. I'm not Vanessa. Brian staggered back as if I'd slapped him. For a second, he looked like he couldn't breathe. You. He gritted his teeth, struggling to keep his composure. Who are you? I met his gaze head-on, refusing to flinch. My name is Emma, I said. And 3 months ago, I was forced to marry you. To save my foster mother's life. The world around us seemed to fall away, the murmurs of other shoppers, the beeping of cash registers, the faint music playing overhead. It was just the two of us, tangled in a story neither of us had wanted but could no longer escape. Brian's face darkened. He grabbed my wrist, not hard enough to hurt, but firm enough that I couldn't pull away easily. Explain, he said, now. And so I did. Standing there in the middle of a fluorescent-lit grocery store, I told Brian everything. How Vanessa had run away. How the Jang family had blackmailed me using my foster mother's medical bills. How I had stood at the altar in Vanessa's place. How I had endured his mockery, his contempt, his cruelty. All while counting the days until my twin returned and I could finally disappear. Brian didn't say a word the entire time. He didn't let go of my wrist, either. When I finally fell silent, drained and breathless, he spoke in a voice so low I could barely hear it. Why didn't you fight back? Why didn't you tell me? Tears burned at the corners of my eyes, but I blinked them away. Because you would never have believed me, I said bitterly. You hated me from the first moment you saw me. And besides, it didn't matter who I was. All you wanted was someone to blame. Brian released me slowly, as if he was afraid he might break me if he held on too tightly. He stepped back, running a hand through his hair in frustration. He started, then stopped. For once, Brian Hay was speechless. I picked up the box of blueberries and turned away. I have nothing more to say to you, I said quietly. Goodbye, Brian. Without looking back, I left the store, and him, standing there among the ruins of all the lies we had been forced to live. But as the automatic doors slid shut behind me, I heard his voice, barely a whisper, almost lost to the wind. Emma, wait. I didn't. I kept walking, my heart pounding in my ears. It was over. It had to be. I thought that was the end. I thought I could close the door on that chapter of my life and never look back. But I had underestimated Brian Hay. 2 days later, he showed up at the entrance of my apartment building. I was coming back from the market, balancing 2 bags of groceries, when I saw him, leaning against the black luxury car parked by the curb, his expensive suit wrinkled like he hadn't slept. The moment our eyes met, he straightened up. Emma, he said, his voice raw. I turned around immediately. Emma, wait. He called, running after me. I walked faster, heart racing, ignoring the curious stares from the security guards. I reached the elevator and jabbed the button frantically. Brian caught up just as the doors opened, slipping inside with me before they closed. We stood in silence as the elevator began to climb. The tiny space seemed to shrink, the air thick with everything we weren't saying. When we reached my floor, I stepped out. He followed. Go away, I said, my voice trembling with anger I hadn't even realized was still inside me. I can't, Brian said simply. I fumbled with my keys, nearly dropping them, but managed to open the door. Before I could slam it in his face, he pressed a hand against it, stopping me. Just 5 minutes, he said, please. Against every instinct screaming inside me, I hesitated, and that was enough. Brian stepped inside, closing the door quietly behind him. He looked so out of place in my small, warm apartment, like a storm trapped in a glass jar. I dropped the groceries on the kitchen counter and crossed my arms. Talk, I said coldly. Brian inhaled sharply, as if steeling himself for battle. I didn't know, he said. I swear to you, Emma, I didn't know. I know, I said. You didn't care to know. He flinched, as if I had slapped him. I treated you horribly, he admitted, voice cracking. I thought you were after my money. I thought you were like them. Them. The word hung between us, heavy with years of betrayal and manipulation he must have experienced before we ever met. I don't care what you thought, I said. You were cruel. You humiliated me. You destroyed the one thing I cared about most. Brian's eyes darkened with guilt. He knew exactly what I meant, the document for my foster mother's medical care that he had burned. I'm sorry, he said. I can't undo what I did. But I can make it right. I laughed bitterly. Make it right? How? By throwing money at me again? He shook his head. No, he said. Not with money. With my life. I stared at him, stunned. I want a second chance, Brian said. Not for Vanessa. Not for anyone else. For you. Silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. Finally, I spoke, my voice low and trembling. You don't even know who I am, I said. You never tried to. Brian stepped closer, slowly, carefully, as if approaching a wounded animal. Then let me start now, he said. Please, Emma. Let me know you. For a long moment, I said nothing. The part of me that had suffered so much wanted to slam the door in his face, to lock him out of my life forever. But another part, smaller, quieter, whispered that maybe, just maybe, he was telling the truth. That maybe not all broken things had to stay broken. I took a shaky breath and looked him in the eye. One chance, I said. That's all you get. Brian's shoulders sagged with relief. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. One chance, he echoed. And so, against all odds, a new chapter began, not with trust, not with forgiveness, but with a single fragile thread, hope. Forced to replace her twin sister in an arranged marriage, Emma finds herself trapped with a man who despises her, and a family that sees her as disposable. When the truth finally surfaces, she tries to escape and rebuild her life. But Brian Hay isn't willing to let her go so easily. In a web of deception, pride, and old scars, two broken hearts must decide if they deserve a second chance, or if they are destined to destroy each other forever. Brian didn't barge into my life immediately. He was patient, surprisingly so. The next few days, I caught glimpses of him near my building. A black car parked across the street. A tall figure lingering near the cafe downstairs, pretending to be just another passerby. He wasn't pushing. He was waiting. Waiting for me to decide. Meanwhile, my own life continued moving forward. Work was picking up speed. My mom was steadily recovering, her smiles coming easier, her steps stronger. For once, peace wasn't something I had to fight for, it was just there, in small everyday moments. But Brian's shadow followed me everywhere. One evening, after a long meeting, I stepped into the cafe across the street for a quick coffee. And there he was, sitting alone at a corner table, a coffee cup untouched in front of him, his dark eyes never leaving the door. Our gazes locked. He stood up immediately, as if afraid I might run again. I almost did. But something in his expression, not desperation, not pity, but something quieter, stopped me. I sighed and walked over. I have 5 minutes, I said. Brian gave a faint, almost imperceptible smile. It was the first real smile I had ever seen from him. Thank you, he said softly. We sat down. For a moment, we just stared at each other, two strangers trying to find a way across a canyon of mistakes and pain. I don't expect you to forgive me, Brian said. I don't deserve it. I just want to be honest now. I didn't answer. I just listened. I was angry, he admitted. Not at you. At everything. At my parents. At the people around me. At myself. I didn't want a wife. I didn't want a marriage. And when you showed up, looking exactly like the woman who ran away, I blamed you for everything I hated. He ran a hand through his hair, looking exhausted. But you stayed, he said. You endured everything, quietly. I lowered my gaze, not wanting him to see how his words were reopening old wounds. I didn't have a choice, I whispered. I know, Brian said. And I hate myself for it. Silence stretched between us again, heavy and suffocating. Finally, he pulled something from his coat pocket and slid it across the table. A small velvet box. I hesitated, then opened it. Inside was a necklace. Simple, elegant. Nothing flashy. A delicate silver chain with a tiny pendant shaped like a feather. "It's not an apology," Brian said. "It's a promise. To be better. To not be the man you married, but the man you deserve." I closed the box slowly. "I don't know if I can ever trust you," I said honestly. "I know," he said. "But I'll keep trying. As long as it takes." I stood up, heart pounding. "Good night, Brian," I said. He didn't stop me. He just watched me go, his eyes filled not with sadness, but with hope. For the first time, I realized, maybe he really meant it. Maybe. Days passed. Brian kept his distance, but never disappeared. He didn't flood me with messages. He didn't send extravagant gifts. Instead, he did something much harder. He respected my space. Sometimes I would find small, almost invisible signs of him. A coffee delivered to the office with no name, just the way I liked it. An umbrella left by the building entrance on a rainy afternoon. A bouquet of white lilies, my foster mother's favorite, placed anonymously outside my door. No demands. No pressure. Only quiet reminders that he was still there, waiting. I hated how a part of me noticed. How a part of me softened. One evening, my mother and I went for a walk in the small park near our building. She laughed more easily now, her arm hooked through mine, her steps light. "You seem distracted lately," she said, giving me a knowing look. I shrugged. "Work," I lied. She smiled gently. "Some burdens are heavier than others, Emma. You don't have to carry everything alone." I tightened my grip on her arm. I had carried so much for so long, for everyone, that I didn't even know what it felt like to lean on someone. Especially someone like Brian Hay. And yet, as we turned a corner, I spotted him sitting on a bench in the distance, pretending to read a book. He looked up, meeting my eyes briefly, and for once, he didn't approach. He just smiled. Softly, patiently. Something cracked a little more inside me. Maybe he was serious. Maybe he wasn't the same man anymore. But before I could process what I was feeling, my phone buzzed violently in my pocket. I pulled it out. A message from an unknown number. "You think you've won? You're just a stand-in. Always have been. Always will be." I froze. My mother noticed immediately. "Emma?" I forced a smile and slipped the phone back into my pocket. "It's nothing," I said. "Just work." But my heart was racing. I knew exactly who had sent that message. Vanessa. She wasn't done with me yet. I tried to ignore the message. Tried to pretend it didn't affect me. But late that night, as I sat by the window staring at the quiet city lights, I couldn't stop hearing Vanessa's voice in my head. "You're just a stand-in. Always have been. Always will be." I hated how easily she could still get under my skin. How, even after everything, a part of me still doubted if I was anything more than someone else's replacement. The next day, I buried myself in work. Emails, sketches, meetings, anything to keep my mind busy. It almost worked. Until the evening, when I returned home and found Brian waiting in the lobby. He stood when he saw me, looking uncertain, almost hesitant. "I know I promised to give you space," he said quietly, "but can we talk? Just for a minute." I should have said no. But something in his expression, the raw vulnerability, the fear of losing something he didn't even know he wanted until it was almost gone, made me nod. We walked to a small corner of the lobby, away from curious eyes. Brian shoved his hands into his pockets, clearly struggling with himself. "I heard some things," he said finally. "About Vanessa." I stiffened immediately. "What things?" He shook his head, frustrated. "Not from her directly, gossip, rumors, that she didn't come back because she regretted leaving me, but because she was forced to, because her life abroad was falling apart." I swallowed hard. Brian met my eyes. "And that you were the one who paid for her mistakes. You were the one who kept everything from falling apart while everyone else treated you like you were disposable." For a long moment, I didn't say anything. There it was. The truth. Hanging in the air between us like smoke. You don't have to say anything, Brian said. I just needed you to know. I see it now. I see you. Something twisted painfully inside my chest. But before I could reply, the elevator dinged. And out stepped Vanessa. She wore a tight designer dress, heavy makeup, and a smile so sharp it could cut glass. Brian, she said sweetly, as if nothing had ever happened between them. As much as I hate to interrupt your little date, we need to talk. I felt his entire body tense beside me. Vanessa's eyes flicked toward me, dripping with disdain. You can go now, she said to me like I was the help. Brian didn't move. Neither did I. Vanessa's smile faltered slightly. She hadn't expected that. I'm not going anywhere, I said quietly. Brian's hand brushed mine lightly, not a grab, not a pull, just a touch. A choice. He was choosing me. Vanessa's eyes darkened. And just like that, I knew. This wasn't over. It was only beginning. Vanessa's smile sharpened into something cruel. I wasn't talking to you, she said sweetly, her voice dripping poison. I was talking to my husband. Brian's hand tightened slightly against mine. I'm not your husband, he said coldly. You gave up that right the moment you ran away. The lobby felt too small, too suffocating. The security guards at the front desk were pretending not to watch, but I could feel their eyes burning into us. Vanessa tilted her head, fake pity oozing from her expression. Oh, Brian, she purred. You really think she told you the truth? She turned her gaze back to me, her eyes gleaming with vicious satisfaction. You think you're so noble, Emma? The poor, tragic substitute who suffered so much? She laughed softly. Maybe you should tell Brian the whole truth. About who you really are. My stomach twisted violently. Brian frowned, sensing the shift immediately. What is she talking about? I shook my head slightly. She's lying. But Vanessa didn't stop. She pulled out her phone, swiping through a few screens before holding it up between us. There, on the screen, was an old photo. It was me, barely 16, standing in front of a rundown foster home, clutching a garbage bag full of clothes. The headline above the image was brutal. Orphan girl abandoned again, trouble follows wherever she goes. Brian's face paled slightly as he read it. Vanessa's voice was a whisper, but every word sliced through me like a knife. She wasn't just poor, Brian, she said. She was a reject. A girl no one wanted. Bounced from family to family, trouble. Always trouble. I felt the blood drain from my face. The humiliation I had buried for so many years came roaring back, raw and merciless. Brian looked at me, confusion and pain swirling in his eyes. Is it true? He asked quietly. For a moment, I wanted to deny it. To run. To disappear before he could see all the broken, ugly parts of me. But I was tired of running. Tired of hiding. I lifted my chin and met his gaze squarely. Yes, I said. Every word. Silence. Vanessa smiled triumphantly, convinced she had won. But then Brian did something neither of us expected. He reached out and took my hand again. Tightly, firmly. So what? He said. Vanessa's smirk vanished. Brian turned fully to face me, his voice steady and clear. I don't care where you came from. I care about who you are now. For the first time in years, I felt my throat tighten with tears I couldn't swallow. Vanessa stood there, stunned, as Brian led me away, past the lobby, past the onlookers, past the girl who had once had everything. And for the first time, it wasn't her world anymore. It was mine. Brian didn't let go of my hand until we were inside the car, the doors closed, the city lights a blur around us. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was heavy, meaningful, necessary. Finally, Brian exhaled slowly. Why didn't you tell me before? He asked, not accusing, just wondering. I looked down at our intertwined hands. Because I didn't want you to look at me the way they all did, I said quietly. Like I was broken. Like I was something to be pitied. Brian tightened his grip. I don't pity you, he said firmly. I admire you. I blinked at him, caught off guard. You survived things most people wouldn't even understand, Brian continued. And you still became, you. His words were soft, but they landed like thunder inside my chest. For the first time, I believed him. Maybe he really did see me, not as a replacement, not as a burden, but as someone worth choosing. Hope stirred painfully in my heart, delicate and dangerous. But before I could let myself fall into it completely, reality slammed back into me. Brian's phone buzzed violently on the dashboard. He hesitated, then answered. Yes? His voice was cold, cautious. I couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, but I didn't need to. Brian's expression hardened with every second. His jaw tightened. His hand clenched into a fist. Finally, he ended the call with a clipped "I'll handle it." He turned to me, his face grim. My parents know, he said. My stomach twisted. They want to see you, he added, tomorrow. I stared at him, heart pounding. And if I don't? Brian hesitated. They'll come here instead. Of course they would. The Hay family wasn't used to being ignored. I leaned back against the seat, closing my eyes briefly. I had fought so hard to build a new life. And now, the past was dragging me back into its claws. Brian reached out, gently tucking a strand of hair behind my ear. I'll be with you, he said. I won't let them hurt you. But even as he said it, we both knew. Some wounds couldn't be protected against. Some battles I would have to fight on my own. Tomorrow I would face the Hay family. Tomorrow I would have to prove, not just to them, but to myself, that I was no longer the girl no one wanted. I was Emma. And I wasn't running anymore. The next morning, I dressed carefully. Simple, neat, strong. No armor, no mask, just me. When Brian's car pulled up outside, he got out to open the door for me without a word. There was no fake gentleness, no performative smiles. Only a quiet, fierce determination in the way he moved. We drove in silence. The Hay family estate loomed into view, cold and distant, exactly as I remembered it. The perfect stage for judgment. Inside, Mr. and Mrs. Hay were already waiting in the grand sitting room. Mr. Hay stood with his hands behind his back, military stiff. Mrs. Hay sat rigidly on the couch, her sharp eyes raking over me the second I stepped inside. So, Mr. Hay said, voice like ice. This is the girl who deceived our family. I opened my mouth to speak, but Brian stepped in front of me. She didn't deceive anyone, he said calmly. She was forced into this. Mr. Hay's mouth twisted in disgust. Forced? Don't insult our intelligence, Brian. She knew what she was doing the moment she put on that wedding dress. Mrs. Hay folded her arms, her voice clipped and cruel. Girls like her always know how to play the victim. The words hit harder than I wanted to admit. Old insecurities flared up, the feeling of being worthless, disposable. But I stood my ground. I never wanted your name, I said quietly. I never wanted your money. I only wanted to save the woman who raised me. Mrs. Hay sneered. And what a fine job you've done, dragging our family into scandal. I could see it, the headlines they feared, the shame they couldn't bear, the truth they refused to face. Brian stepped closer to me, his presence a shield against their contempt. You made a deal, he said to his parents. You used her. And now you're angry because you lost control. Mr. Hay's face darkened dangerously. You're throwing away your future for her? He snapped. Brian didn't even hesitate. I'm choosing her, he said. For the first time in my life, I'm choosing someone who didn't demand anything from me. I felt my heart crack open painfully at his words. But Mr. Hay wasn't finished. You think you know everything? He hissed. You think this little orphan is some innocent flower? He threw a thick manila envelope onto the coffee table. Go ahead. See what she's hiding. I stared at it, frozen. Brian hesitated, then picked it up and opened it. His face paled almost immediately. I stepped forward, forcing myself to look. Inside were documents, court records, foster reports, school expulsions, minor criminal offenses, a trail of every mistake, every failure, every ugly moment from my past. Things I had fought so hard to bury. Things I had fought so hard to survive. I could barely breathe. Brian turned to look at me, the file trembling slightly in his hands. "Emma," he said softly. And in that single word, I heard it. Not judgment. Not disgust. Grief. For me. He set the envelope down carefully, like it was something poisonous, and pulled me gently into his arms. He held me there, in front of the people who wanted me broken. And he whispered into my hair. "I don't care. None of that matters to me." I buried my face against his chest, fighting the tears threatening to spill. Mr. Hayes' voice cut through the moment like a blade. "If you walk out with her, Brian, you're no longer our son." Silence. The world seemed to stop. Brian leaned back, looking me in the eyes. "I made my choice," he said. Then he turned to his parents, his voice steady and clear. "I'd rather build a new family with someone I love than stay in a house built on lies." Without another word, he took my hand. Together, we walked out of the Hay estate. Out of their world. Into whatever future we could carve for ourselves, no matter how uncertain, no matter how fragile. We chose each other. Finally. For a while it felt like peace. Real peace. Brian and I moved into a small apartment together, nothing like the sprawling mansions he had grown up in, but it was ours. Quiet mornings. Coffee shared between smiles. Late nights talking about dreams we were too afraid to say aloud before. I had almost started to believe that we could leave everything behind, that the past was done clawing at us. But some ghosts refused to stay buried. It happened on an ordinary Thursday. I came home from work, arms full of fresh groceries, humming under my breath, only to find the door to our apartment slightly ajar. My heart stopped. I pushed it open carefully. Inside, everything was trashed. Drawers yanked out. Cushions torn apart. Glass shattered across the floor. And at the center of it all, scrawled across the living room wall in bright red spray paint, were two words. Stolen life. I stumbled back, bile rising in my throat. Footsteps sounded behind me. Brian. He took one look at the scene and immediately pulled me behind him protectively, scanning the apartment for any remaining threats. But whoever had done this was already gone. The police came. Statements were taken. Photos snapped. But deep down, I already knew. It wasn't random. It wasn't about money. It was about me. Later that night, after the police left, Brian paced the small living room, furious and restless. "I'll find out who did this," he promised. But we both already knew the answer. Vanessa. She wasn't just angry anymore. She was desperate. She had lost everything she thought was hers by right. Brian, the Hay name, the life of luxury. And in her mind, I was the thief who had taken it all. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wreckage of our once safe little world, feeling exhaustion seep into my bones. Maybe it would never end. Maybe no matter how far we ran, the past would always find us. Brian knelt in front of me, taking my hands in his. "We'll fix this," he said fiercely. "We'll rebuild. Again and again, if we have to." His conviction should have made me feel better. Instead, it scared me. Because I wasn't sure how many more times I could break and still put myself back together. "I don't want you to lose everything because of me," I whispered. Brian cupped my face, forcing me to meet his eyes. "I didn't lose anything," he said. "I found you." Tears burned behind my eyes, but I blinked them away. Before I could answer, his phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. Another message. This time, it was a photo. Vanessa. Standing in front of another courthouse, holding what looked like official papers. "If I can't have him, neither can you. Let's see if you survive court, little thief." My blood ran cold. Vanessa wasn't just lashing out now. She was preparing to destroy us completely. And this time, she wasn't playing games. The summons arrived 2 days later. Official, cold, heavy. Vanessa had filed a lawsuit Potisset, defamation. She accused me of stealing her marriage, damaging her reputation, ruining her future. Every lie she could think of, neatly typed on expensive legal paper. I sat at the kitchen table, the letter trembling in my hands. Brian stood behind me, reading over my shoulder, his rage simmering just below the surface. "We'll fight it," he said immediately. I'll get the best lawyers. We'll destroy her in court. But I shook my head. I don't want a war, I whispered. I just want it to end. Brian crouched beside me, resting his forehead against my arm. I'm so sorry, he murmured. For everything. We both knew the truth. This wasn't just about Vanessa's bitterness. It was about all the people who had once looked at me and seen nothing worth fighting for. But Brian fought. For me. With me. And I realized, I wasn't that abandoned girl anymore. I wasn't someone who needed to run. I was someone who could stand and fight, and win. The courtroom was packed the day of the hearing. Journalists, onlookers. Everyone hungry for scandal. Vanessa sat across from me, dressed impeccably, her smile sweet and poisonous as ever. But I wasn't the same girl she remembered. When I took the stand, I told the truth. All of it. How I had been forced into the marriage. How I had lived under a false identity to protect my foster mother. How I had survived humiliation, cruelty, and betrayal, and still chose to walk away quietly. The judge listened intently. The room was silent. And when it was over, when the verdict came down, Vanessa lost. Her lies collapsed under the weight of the truth. The court dismissed her claims. Brian's lawyers filed a counterclaim for damages. Vanessa would walk out not just humiliated, but ruined. And I? I walked out free. Really, truly free. Outside the courthouse, Brian was waiting. The afternoon sun caught in his hair, casting golden light around him like a promise. He smiled, not the arrogant smirk I once knew, but something softer. Something real. Without a word, he opened his arms. I stepped into them. And for the first time, it felt like I was stepping into my life, not someone else's shadow, not someone else's leftovers. My life. Ours. Brian pulled back just enough to look at me, his hand brushing my cheek. I love you, he said simply. No lies. No contracts. No pasts. I smiled, tears blurring the world around me. I love you too, I whispered. We didn't need witnesses. We didn't need promises made in desperation. We had each other. And finally, that was enough.